Hello, and welcome to another episode of Harvest Prosperity Podcast. I'm your host, Naomi Marsh, and I'm so glad you're joining me today as we're going to chat about healthy boundaries and the effect that they can have on our relationships with others, as well as our relationship with ourselves. Boundaries, they're kind of like that secret sauce, I think, for building trust and respect and genuine connection and all those beautiful ingredients that a healthy relationship has. The issue is that it really shouldn't be a secret, we have the ability to change that. And I do think that the more awareness that we're bringing around boundaries, even if it's throwing it around so much that you're so tired of hearing that word, boundaries, it's important. And so it's not only important with your relationships, like I said, with others, but it's also important for your relationship with yourself, how you respect yourself and love yourself. And so whether you're dealing with friends or family, work colleagues, these boundaries are really what helps you to stay balanced and keeps your relationships healthy and keeps you safe as well. So let's just dive right in. I'm ready for this. This is something that I also have explored a lot in my own personal life. I think we all have at one point or another, but it certainly wasn't something that I was taught at a very young age. In fact, I didn't really realize what boundaries were, until I was in, probably, I'd say my mid 40s. And the thing that I think struck me the most was that it's really in my control. It's something that I make a conscious and intentional decision to protect myself. And that's really what a boundary is. And so these, boundaries that we're talking about today, I'm going to give you some tips that I've learned that were very helpful for me and some examples. But I really want you to let it sink in on why these boundaries are important for you. And really analyze where in your life that you can either establish a boundary or maybe you need to make some adjustments. Some boundaries are not movable. They are there for your safety and they will stay there. Then there's other boundaries that are movable, that need to be adjusted depending on your relationship, depending on your growth, where you're at. Maybe certain things that used to trigger you don't trigger you anymore. So you can release a little bit of that stronger boundary that protected you from that being triggered. And those types of things we can talk about here as well. So some of you might be wondering, what is all this talk about boundaries? What is it? So I'm just going to kind of get through the basics. Boundaries are kind of like, I said they were like secret sauce earlier, when it comes to relationships, but you can also think about it as like a strong foundation. For when you build a house, you need a strong foundation in order to hold up the walls and keep everything together and make it last. So our relationships require these clear, healthy boundaries that allow us to grow, and that sets a strong foundation for our relationships. And so without them, we don't have trust, we don't have respect. Relationships really are, they can crumble. There's nothing to hold them together. All those beautiful ingredients that require a healthy boundary or a healthy relationship, they require care and they can just fall apart. And so, but when we set and maintain these boundaries, we're creating that safe space, for ourselves and for those we care about. And it sets a really great example. So I think that when you become aware of what a healthy boundary looks like for you, that's really the beginning, and this deep awareness is like, okay, this may not feel comfortable for me. How can, every time I'm around this person, they continue to talk about things that I have already said make me feel uncomfortable. Maybe they're, you know, continuing to come around you and have this locker room talk type of thing, and it makes you feel uncomfortable, and you've expressed that. Once you've expressed that to them, that's setting a boundary. But first it came from you feeling something inside of you that said, this doesn't feel right. That's your higher self saying, okay, you need to take a look at this. This is not something that is healthy for you. And so when we listen to our higher selves, our inner self, and we say, oh, that doesn't feel right. Why doesn't it feel right? Is it because it's not making you feel safe? Is it because, of another reason? So you really need to dig deep in this. This is where journaling can help you to understand where, what relationships in your life need some adjustments with your boundaries. And when we maintain these boundaries and we take responsibility for them and enforce them, which is one of the hardest things to do, I think, sometimes with some of these close relationships, we're going to find ourselves living more in harmony and walking with confidence, no matter what. So, yes, awareness is the first step, but then you have to bring yourself further. Okay, now I'm aware of these. I'm aware of these relationships, or this maybe particular relationship you just want to focus on, that I need to establish some healthy boundaries for myself. Have you ever felt, stretched too thin, or maybe found yourself saying yes to things that you really wanted to say no to? And that is your higher self. Those are signals that your higher self is saying, that this boundary may need to be established. So you're using a combination of that intuition that you're born with, and that intuition is a part of your higher self that's saying, hey, something's going on here. You can feel it. So pay attention to those signals. And personal boundaries are a little bit more difficult, I think, for people who have never been taught to stand up for themselves. Maybe they're people pleasers, or they've, already always been the person that says yes, even if they're uncomfortable. So before we dive any deeper, I just want to pause for a minute and let me just share something kind of lighthearted with you about boundaries. And this is how important they are. They could be as, simple or as complex, but they all hold the same thing, the same root, which is health, keeping yourself healthy. And so I had to set boundaries with my own self with chips. I know, as funny as that sounds. I'm choosing something lighthearted because we're going to dig into some deeper stuff. But the healthy boundary for me was okay, I know I enjoy chips, but I need to set a boundary on how much I'm eating. But portion size was really important. So I didn't want to deny myself of this yummy treat that I like, but I did need to set a boundary on how much. So rather than grabbing a whole bag of chips, I would grab the little small snack size bags, and I would fill it up with, a small handful, and that would be what I, would use for my chip snack. And so I knew that grabbing the whole bag for me it wasn't healthy. It wasn't working for me, because although it tasted good and I could just, snack, it wasn't giving me I wasn't setting any boundaries with that. So it can be as easy, not as easy, it can be as lighthearted or simple, as you say, as setting a little personal boundary for yourself with snack time, with exercise time, with your morning routines, with your evening routines. All of those are healthy boundaries that we're setting, and we're having these conversations with ourselves so that we can be our best, you know. So that to me is something that's a little bit lighthearted, but it's still the same. Boundaries are boundaries, regardless of whether they are lighthearted as, your snacks, or something a lot deeper, a close friend. Communicating then becomes outside of ourselves. We can communicate with ourselves. We can, put notes on the fridge. We can put the snack bags right next to the chips. We can do all of these things. That is within ourselves. When you add another component, which is another person, to the mix, you need to have communication. And in order to have healthy boundaries, you need to learn how to communicate what you need from this other person. And so communication is that connective tissue, from our inner awareness with the outside world. And it's not always easy to voice our boundaries, especially when our emotions are involved. But it's so important for us if we want to live a healthy life and have healthy and have healthy relationships. We need healthy boundaries. So, for example, when you're discussing a topic with family members, let's choose one that's very common, politics. Some people don't want to talk about politics. Some families are great with it. But in this situation, let's say you don't want to talk about politics for this particular time. And this family member, refuses to accept that you are just not in a place to talk about politics right now. So you can say something, instead of getting, feeling like you need to have a confrontation, you can say something like, hey, I love spending time with you, but I really want to avoid these intense arguments about politics. So let's just steer clear of that for right now. That's something easy. You're not attacking them. You're not provoking them. Some people may be provoked just by you setting a boundary. You can be as gentle and as polite as possible, and they still will not accept it. That's one of the reasons why healthy boundaries is so important for those types of relationships, where you can stand firm with who you are, what you want to accept and not accept. And you should be okay with that. And the people you surround yourself should respect that as well. So these are what I consider acts of self-care. We're caring for ourselves. And so I care for my health if I'm saying, hey, I don't want to talk about this right now. I'm not, maybe I'm spent. Maybe I talked about it all day, all week, or whatever. And right now in this moment, I just want to chill and talk about something else. That's okay. That's a boundary. You're setting a boundary. But how is this person that you have a relationship with supposed to know how you feel unless you communicate it with them? So by saying, hey, I love our time together, but I'm trying to avoid this and that, whatever, you're conveying to them, you're communicating with them, hey, this is how I feel. So this is respectful dialogue, and it's designed to kind of nurture that relationship, with understanding and, without, compromising your health. So that's, very important. Communication is key. But when you're communicating, it's also important on that same note to be an active listener as well. So boundaries are not just one way. We also have to respect other people's boundaries as well. So how do you do that? Well, you're communicating yours, but you also need to be aware and actively, listen and respect others' boundaries as well. So when we truly listen to someone else, we understand, and we can learn to communicate our own needs more effectively as well. So there is a sense of reciprocity, give and take there, that you're learning, and you're learning how to communicate, you're learning how to listen, and that creates that understanding and builds that trust and strengthens our relationship. So it allows everyone to feel heard, seen, and respected, and that's really what we want in these healthy relationships. So there are going to be challenges. Setting boundaries is not always smooth sailing. And, there might be a fear inside of you of disappointing someone or feeling guilty, or, for just simply for prioritizing your own needs. I mentioned being like a people pleaser or something. I used to be that way. I would say yes when I really didn't want to say yes. I felt uncomfortable. It was unhealthy for me. I didn't really want to be in the environment or whatever the situation was. And I needed to overcome that. It was uncomfortable. And there was, at times, a lot of fear I had to face of disappointing someone. But I had to put my own health in first. Because I know that I can't respect someone else's boundaries if I can't even learn to respect mine or enforce my own. So it's really important for you to understand it's a two-way street. And the more you observe, the more you ask the right questions and communicate and actively listen, you can learn a lot about one another. And remember, saying no is a complete sentence. This is an important part of self-care and part of setting these boundaries. You don't have to even explain yourself. No is a complete sentence, and it's okay. It shouldn't be received any other way. So I think that for me, I really needed to understand not just about boundaries. I understood that, but more so on how to set them. What does that feel like? And this is something you are going to continuously work on. It's not a one and done. And I even find myself, even recently, needing to set a boundary. And it was very uncomfortable for me. The situation called for me to say no. And it was to someone that I was very close to. And they crossed a line. They crossed a boundary that I had set. And in doing so, I needed to say no. And it was not respected. And I needed to walk away. And I walked away from what I thought was close and beautiful and mutually respected relationship. But they didn't respect my boundaries. And the boundaries that I set were very important to me, and honoring them were very important. And so I want you to go out and do the same thing. I'm not saying be rude, but setting boundaries is not meant to be a confrontation. And that's what I thought growing up. That's why it took me so long to learn what boundaries even were. Is because I thought that because when I was growing up, whenever I would try to stick up for myself, I was met with confrontation. It was a fight. We were going to argue, we were going to yell and scream, and everything was just going to blow up every time. And so I thought growing up and felt that if I stood up for myself, it would mean confrontation. I would have to fight for my right to just be respected. And that's not the case. It can be received that well from someone who is not in a place, of growth or understanding, and that's okay. They're not there yet. But you don't have to allow them to drag you down to where they're at. Instead, by setting these boundaries, you're setting this beautiful example. And someone may say, hey, you know what? Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I didn't realize that. Those are the golden nuggets of relationships, when they really sit and listen to you and actively say, hey, thank you for sharing that with me because I didn't know, and I'm going to try to do better. When we know better, we do better. My husband told me a story when he was younger and he worked in construction. He was manager, and he'd had all these really inexperienced workers, and this one guy, he said, he would just bend these nails, and I mean, he just could not hammer straight. And so anyway, he had to let him go. And later on in life, he started, thinking about things that he'd done, and he realized, that he didn't let this gentleman know why exactly he was letting him go, because he was bending the nails. And instead of taking the time and saying, hey, dude, you're bending the nails, he just let him go and hired the next guy who knew how to hammer. So, but what would have happened, do you think, if he would have said, hey, dude, you're bending the nails. If you don't stop bending the nails, you're gonna be fired. Well, he probably would have taken a moment and been like, oh, well, shoot, maybe I need to figure out how to not bend these nails. So my point of saying that is that this is your opportunity to say, hey, dude, you're bending the nails. If somebody keeps coming in and stepping all over your boundaries, you can give them an opportunity, but you have to be able to communicate that, and so that's where the communication is so important. And you can communicate in your own language. You don't have to use there's no special skills that requires you to, if you have a relationship with somebody, you're going to know your relationship language. So you use that to your advantage, and we're all in this together. And if we really want to have these beautiful relationships, we need to be able to set beautiful boundaries. And like I said, it's common to feel, concerned or even worried about disappointing someone or letting them down, But it's important to remember that you can't please everyone all of the time. And it's okay to say no and set boundaries when you need it. And I feel like honesty and being upfront about that is better than overcommitting to something or committing to something that's not healthy for you. So communicate your limitations clearly, and your boundaries your boundaries clearly and respectfully, and try to find a solution that works for both of you. I think a lot of people fear being seen as selfish, or uncaring, but when we, just for prioritizing yourself, and that, maybe our own needs come last, but that's not the case. When we're taking care of ourselves and we're trying to grow and be the best human that we possibly can, it requires us to be, mindful of what's healthy for us. And once you understand, maybe the source of why you feel, you're feeling this way, you're feeling guilty, or you're feeling, afraid of being seen as a certain way, you can start to work through that. And, learn to let others know what you need and what's important to you. And this can alleviate some of the guilt that you're feeling as well. So once you set that boundary, you're like, it feels so much better now that I've got that out. I've said what I needed to say. And now let's just kind of move on and, keep to it. I think another challenge is sticking to your boundaries. It can be really tempting to give in, or compromise when others push back against us. When you set a boundaries and they're pushing back against you, and you're used to being the yes person, it might be tempting to just give in. But don't do it. It's important for you to be uncomfortable. That's going to happen. It's going to be uncomfortable for you until you get used to it, you know? And, you know, when someone pushes back, it's like they're being disrespectful. So it's going to be a little bit emotional. So when you compromise, you're allowing them to step on your boundaries. You are the one that's in charge of that, you know? And so whether you hurt them, you make them angry or whatever it is, just know that you have the right, your birthright, your soul's right to prioritize your own health. And if the people in your life want to push back and are not used to having you, you know, implement these boundaries, they may resist your attempts. Some people don't have a clear understanding what boundaries are either. They could be, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, and they've never even understood what boundaries are. So give them a little bit of credit and leniency by communicating. And if they're curious about it, share what you've learned about your own boundaries, and maybe that can help them, to be more healthy in other relationships that they have. So when somebody crosses these boundaries and you have these feelings, of, disrespect and discomfort, frustration, even resentment, this is why it's important for you to clearly and calmly communicate and then stick to it. Because they may have their own personal issues that are preventing them from even recognizing, respecting, or even acknowledging other people's boundaries. They may not be equipped to do that. And you may have to walk away from some relationships if you're looking for health in your life. Health in your mind, your body, your emotions, your spiritual health, all of it is connected. And so if these people in your life, in your relationships that you have, are not willing to be in your corner as you're trying to be healthier and live a healthy life, well, then maybe they're not part of your future. And it's okay to walk away. No loss of love. It's just not healthy. That's harder to do, I feel like, with people, in our family, in our really close, relationships. It's a little bit harder. And that's where we rely heavily on communication. It may take, more than, 3, 4, 5, 10 times to share your boundaries with somebody, to tell them, hey, this is what it is. But if you're willing to stick to it, then every time it comes up or every time they try to push, keep saying the same thing. Come back right back to your boundary and stick with it. As long as you're clear and you're respectful, you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing everything right for you, and that's okay. Some people just feel like, they can just behave any way that they choose, regardless of the impact it has on others. So you may be met with people like that. And whatever their reason and their struggles with respecting boundaries, that's on them. That's not on you. You're doing what you need to do to be healthy. And so I just want you to know that you've got this. You've got this. It's going to be difficult. And there may be some tears. There may be some lapses as well. But that's okay. Get up, adjust, make the adjustments that you need and move forward, and know that you're learning every time. Every time you struggle, every time you trip, every time you feel like you fail, you're learning something. So get up, know better, and do better. And don't feel like you're alone, because we're all trying to figure this out. Like I said, I'm still dealing with, boundaries and learning how to set boundaries and in my own life, and they grow as I grow and I learn. My boundaries do too. So they're quite expansive in some areas. Some things that, I considered were topics that were off the table because they triggered me, I now encourage. So you see that boundary has expanded. And we need to be able to be movable in some of those ways. But when we're setting a boundary and we need to be firm with it, that is not the time to be movable just because somebody else is uncomfortable with it. Your boundaries are movable when you are growing. That's when that kind of magical, setting happens, and you can start experiencing, what it feels like to adjust those boundaries. So here are some tips that I addressed and that I hope can help you kind of communicate effectively. So if you have a journal, if you have some notes, go ahead and grab that out if you want, or you could just come back and revisit this episode and take notes, which I hope you do. I also have a workbook that I'm working on that should be ready very soon and available on Amazon. And this will allow you to kind of build healthy boundaries through a workbook where you can kind of document your experience and your journey. So first and foremost, you want to be clear and direct. It's important when communicating your boundaries. Use assertive language if you need to. Like I need, I don't. And maybe avoid using passive language, or apologizing for your boundaries. You don't want to apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. Also, use I statements. Using I statements can help you communicate pretty much, anything to do with your boundaries, because you're not blaming or criticizing the other person. So you can say something like, I feel uncomfortable when you do, X, Y, Z. Instead of, you make me feel uncomfortable when you do X, Y, Z. You see the difference between the two? You're not criticizing someone by saying, I feel uncomfortable when, when you do blah, blah, blah. You're saying, I feel uncomfortable. You're not accusing them of making you feel uncomfortable. And be specific. When, for example, like when you say, I need to take a break from our conversation. Instead of saying something like, give me some space, or, get out of my face, or whatever it is, I need a break from our conversation. And that also can help you kind of take the temperature of the conversation and be able to set a boundary right in real time. Instead of maybe what you would do without a boundary would be sitting in that uncomfortable conversation where you're already tapped out, but you're sitting and enduring it anyway. Why should you have to sit and endure it anyway? I mean, unless you're in, a lecture, or unless you're, it would be extremely disrespectful, or it's not your turn to communicate or something like that. There are always scenarios where you may not be able to just, get up and walk out. But if you're having a conversation with somebody and it's becoming heated and you need a break from it, it's okay to say, I need a break. So being specific is really important. Practice an active listening, like I was saying earlier. When someone communicates their boundaries to you, it's important for you to actively listen to them and respect their boundary. This means paying attention to what they're saying. It's not all about you. Don't think about what your response is while they're talking. Really take in what they're saying to you and acknowledge their feelings, and most importantly, respect their boundaries as you expect them to respect yours. So let's do a practice exercise. So imagine a friend inviting you to a party where there will be alcohol and you don't drink. Whether you're choosing a life of sobriety, or maybe you just got sober, or maybe you just don't drink and you don't want to really, be around that. So your friends know that you don't drink, but she insists that that you'll have fun. You should come anyway. Everyone's going to be there, blah, blah, blah. And you need to take a moment, self-reflect. how would you communicate your boundaries effectively in this situation? Again, they're inviting you to a party. You know there's going to be alcohol. It's held at the bar. You don't drink. You've been there before. You just are not interested in going there. You want to hang out with your friends, but not in that environment. They continue to insist. How would you communicate your boundaries here? Yeah, this is where it becomes tough because these are your friends and you want to have fun. It's not like you don't want to go out and have fun. It's just that environment is not where you want to be. That's not where you feel comfortable. So it can be really challenging, to stick with your boundaries when it comes to friends and trying to persuade you to do something that doesn't really align with where you're at. So in this scenario, it's super important to communicate how you're feeling. And you can start by, thanking them for the invitation, let them know that, you want to go out and have fun, but that maybe the bar isn't the best environment for you. Be firm about it, but maybe give another option. Maybe we can go somewhere else, have something else, planned that would be, fun to do, that so you can still go out as friends, but you're setting a boundary that I just don't want to go to the bar. So maybe there's something else that you can do. So you can have some different options, and that's perfectly acceptable. If they continue to push, well, then guess what? You may not be going out with your friends. They may be continuing to go to the bar. And that's okay. Maybe there's something else that, maybe there's a different opportunity for you to hang out that doesn't cross your boundaries, that doesn't make you feel like you're not in a place where where you feel good about yourself. So, and if they continue to pressure you and want you to go, and you've suggested a different activity and they just don't want to do it, or, you just can't win, then you're just probably not going to go. And it's okay, it's hard because we have this, fear of missing out, FOMO. But really, are you missing out? If it's not healthy for you, why are you doing it? And that's the question that you need to ask. I think when we're in this state of self-growth, you're here for a reason. You're listening to this podcast because somewhere inside of you, you're trying to grow. You're trying to thrive. And I'm here to just help guide you and encourage you. And healthy boundaries is one of those ways that is so important that we don't really think about, but is so important for the foundation of who we are and who we want to be, where we want to go, what environments we want to put ourselves in. And I'm honored to offer you this guidance, and it's not a one size fits all. There's lots of beautiful, helpful information out there that we can find about setting healthy boundaries. And let's face it, it's not always a walk in the park. Who hasn't felt the desperate urge to run away when, they had to make that awkward call or the dreaded face-to-face talk, or avoiding it at every corner. Or maybe you've just taken kind of the sneaky, quiet route, your whole life and put your boundaries in place without even letting anyone know. Well, how are they supposed to know they're crossing a boundary if they don't know that one exists? You're bending the nails. So either way, it's not the most thrilling task, on your to-do list, but it's so important. So keep that in mind and journal about it. Journal about your relationships. You have the tools right here, and you're walking around with these tools that you need to be able to live a life that's happy and, and full of health and good benefits. So I think my time is running short, and I really hope that these that this conversation helps you to set boundaries in your life and have the courage to love yourself, even when it's risking disappointing someone else. And although it can be challenging to, prioritize ourselves, especially when we fear the reactions of others, it's important to remember that our happiness and health should be a priority. And it takes courage to put ourselves first. And it's so necessary. Many of us have, myself included, have really grown up with the idea that putting others first is the right thing to do. But it can really be detrimental to our mental health and our self-esteem if we constantly prioritize others' needs and health over ourselves. It's that same, I'm sure you've heard it before. You can't take care of anyone else unless you take care of yourself first. This is what that means. This is part of that being yourself. So it's natural to want to please others around us. We have to learn to prioritize and love ourselves first. And that involves setting healthy boundaries. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Harvest Prosperity podcast. I hope this helps you to set some healthy boundaries in your life and that your relationships thrive and flourish. Don't forget to hit subscribe and visit harvestprosperity.com for holistic coaching, support, or if you just want to reach out to me. You can also connect with me on Instagram or Facebook at Harvest Prosperity. Until next time, continue to nurture those beautiful seeds of greatness within you.